system test. Okay.
This is the sound of a small single-engine airplane flying me to the shores of Lake Turkana. Lake Turkana is a long body of brackish water on the border of Kenya and Ethiopia. I was very excited to visit. I dreamt about seeing Lake Turkana since I was a kid, when I first read about it in a textbook. Over 100 years of research, it's been a site of some of the most important discoveries ever made about how humans evolved. Scientific work done there has been featured on the cover of the journal Nature 12 times, and a lot of that work has been led by one family. That family changed our understanding of the origins of our entire human family, the hominids. How did they do it? What is so special about Lake Turkana, and what might it yet reveal about our species? This is The Naked Mole Rat, a podcast from Liba Studio. My name is Ilya Kolmanovsky. Hello. I am a scientist. Well, I was a scientist. I used to study animal evolution. But then I traded my scalpel and microscope for a microphone and became a podcaster. I focus on making stories about the parts of science I like best, stories of human nature and of evolution. That is, when some bizarre creatures from the past tell us something important about ourselves. And also stories of scientists, the real people behind the discoveries. So today, we will cover not just some people, but a whole family, our human family, hominins. But also a whole family of scientists, a dynasty, I could say. 100 years ago, evolutionary biologists thought humans emerged something like this. First, there were apes, hunched over on their knuckles. Gradually, over generations, they straightened up. Their brain sizes increased. They transformed into a series of intermediate species until they became modern humans. From ape to human, in a straight line. So the task for scientists, therefore, was to find those links from one to the other. Then a young, Cambridge-educated paleoanthropologist appended that understanding. Leakey, 100 years ago, was studying ancient African primates. At the time, we didn't know where the first humans had originated. Darwin had speculated that we came from Africa, but the oldest human-looking bones and teeth had been found in Asia and Europe. Leakey, his wife Mary, and other colleagues spent 30 years searching for bones in East Africa, and finally, in 1960, they unearthed the remains of the oldest and most primitive hominid ever discovered. They also found the earliest tools, pointed stones, from 2 million years ago. This species would be named Homo habilis, which means handy man in the original Latin, and ever since then, textbooks have stated that Homo is the only genus on Earth that can make tools using other tools. But we'll come back to that later. A few years after the discovery of Homo habilis, one of Louis and Mary's sons, Richard, began doing his own work at Lake Turkana. Then Richard and his wife, British paleoanthropologist Leakey, had a daughter in Kenya. They named her Louise in honor of her grandfather, Louis Leakey, who passed away 6 months after she was born. Louise grew up on the shores of Lake Turkana. Today, she's the head of the Turkana Basin Institute and the leading researcher of African fossils.
I'm Louise Leakey, and I work at Lake Turkana, and my family and I have continued with the study of human prehistory and paleontology, looking at collections that are made at Lake Turkana. The family have done this work over the past 50, 60 years in the Turkana Basin.
All right, we've arrived.
It took us about 15 minutes to drive from the makeshift runway on the lake's shore to the Institute's base. I was expecting to see tents. Instead, I saw a collection of small, single-story buildings made of brown brick. They blended beautifully into the violet African twilight. We had a snack and then went straight to the labs. We used UV flashlights to light our path. Dashes of bright green flashed here and there on the ground. They were scorpions, fluorescent in the UV, so we did our best to avoid stepping on them in our Crocs. The lab building housed several identical facilities. Each had a large window, a table, microscopes, benches, and a massive metal door with a wheel handle. Behind these heavy doors were the scientists' most invaluable finds from 50 years of searching an area of about 15,000 square kilometers.
Modern humans first emerged 200,000 years ago. It's the first modern humans. Now, modern Homo sapiens leaves Africa and gets into all around the world around about 80 to 90,000 years ago, but we all came from this part of the world. This is where Homo sapiens evolved, not outside of Africa.
Louise begins by showing me fossils of humans who lived in Africa 200,000-300,000 years ago. I can't say I feel particularly amazed. I came here looking for something much more ancient. This was the easy-to-find stuff lying about on the surface of the sand. But then Louise tells me that's the point. Here at Lake Turkana, everything lies on the surface. Her parents would sometimes find valuable items without even leaving their jeeps or dismounting from their camels. One great find came to them almost by accident.
So this thing, amazingly, was found by a German tourist, okay? And the German tourist found a lot of fossils on the beach. He put them into a basket, and he walked into my father's office and dropped the basket on the floor and said, I have something, Dr. Leakey, that you'll be interested in. He pulled out of the basket and he said, look. And we're like, what? Why did you find that? Why did you pick it up?
It was the skull of a so-called Heidelberg man, considered a common ancestor of both sapiens and Neanderthals. I asked Louise how valuable fossils like this had been preserved here even while they seemed to sit just below the surface.
I mean, there's fossil sites for miles and miles and miles because it was this lake, long lake basin. Because it's in the Rift Valley, it's a depression and water's flowing in from the highlands either side and from the Ethiopian highlands to the north. And so water's coming off the highlands, and over the past 4 million years, it's just a river has meandered through this depression. And rivers carry sediment, and that buries the bones of animals that live in alongside the forests and everything else. And so they arrive, they get buried, and then deep down, and they get tilted up because of all the tectonic activity, and they come back up to the surface again.
That's why Lake Turkana has such a wealth of well-preserved bones. Rivers carry sediment that buries remains. Then those remains resurface ages later in tectonic shifts. These remains, of course, are the exceptions. In most cases, corpses and carcasses get lost in the churn.
You see animals that are dying, and hyenas and lions and jackals, and nothing's left. After a few weeks, there's nothing. So unless these animals die where they get rapidly buried, you never find those remains. So these little windows into the past. And when these things are buried deep down and brought back up to the surface, and then you get natural erosion that expose fragments of fossil, that's what we're looking for on the surface.
Just laying on the ground like that?
Well, they've been exposed.
The next day, I went out to the lake. I saw these windows into the past with my own eyes, and it was stunning. No digging, no cutting through the ground, because winds naturally erode the sands, and that opens up layer after layer of firm, Martian-looking sandy shore. What's left is a vast area in which everything on the surface is millions of years old. Step carefully, because remnants of animal ancestors are everywhere. But finding ancient human fossils is not so simple.
The hominins, which is what I'm coming to, are very rare. It's like the carnivores in today's modern ecosystem. They're very few, unlike people today where there are just too many. We used to be in balance, like the carnivores, top predators, and there were very few. And so they are extremely rare. They are very, very difficult to find any hominin remains.
But Louise's family did find them. How? And what exactly did they find? Here's what she says.
Well, the most spectacular find that I was part of excavation of was of course, the Turkana boy, or the Naryakotomi boy, which is the complete skeleton from the west side of Turkana. And that skeleton was found by a man called Kamoya Kimeu, one of the fossil hunters, and he found a tiny piece of the skull on the surface. And there, he recognized that as belonging to a human ancestor. So they began this excavation. And then over the next 3-4 years, they uncovered a complete skeleton, but it wasn't lying all intact. And the reason it was so complete was because it fell into a swamp. And that swamp meant that the vultures and the hyenas and the jackals couldn't come and disperse the bones and crunch them up. And then if that had happened, we probably would have only found a tiny piece of that skeleton, not the whole thing.
Turkana boy is a 10-year-old Homo erectus boy who lived and died near Lake Turkana about 1.6 million years ago. He is the most complete early hominin skeleton ever found. Kamoya Kimeu, one of the most successful fossil hunters from Richard and Meave Leakey's team, found his bones in 1984. This skeleton, assembled from 108 bones, became the archetype of a new classification, Homo erectus ergaster. Homo ergaster means working man. So Homo ergaster was one of the first truly tall humans. If you were to run into one, you would assume it's a person rather than an ape. It's likely they already had speech. On one occasion, Louise herself found one.
Very close to here, one day we were walking along with my mother, and one of the fossil team had spotted what looked like an ear hole. And it was just on the surface coming out of the ground. And when we stopped to pick it up, it was near some antelope bones. And when we stopped to pick it up, I remember my mother saying, that ear hole is rather large for a primate. We started to dig out what turned into a complete little skull of Homo erectus. But we took it out as a boulder, and then it was cleaned in the camp. It didn't have its face, but it was a complete skull with both sides of its ear and back of the skull. A very beautiful little specimen.
These Homo ergaster finds were beautiful little specimens indeed. But then came the discovery of another hominid by the Leakey family, a new star of the hominid family. It was called Kenyanthropus because it was found in Kenya.
Kenyanthropus was found on the west side, and I wasn't actually at the site when that was found. I was working some sites further north, but that was found by a man called Justice, one of the fossil team. And again, it was a small piece that was exposed, and they went to start to excavate that, but it was in a very soft kind of a clay. And so when it had got wet, even before fossilization, it had expanded and cracked a lot. And so that fossil isn't a very beautiful fossil, but it's terribly important because it's quite complete. And for 3.5 million years, it represented a different species to that which we knew from that time period, which was Australopithecus afarensis, which is otherwise known as Lucy, from Ethiopia. And the type specimen of afarensis comes from Tanzania. And so this was something different to that.
Louise is talking about a very important find here. You've probably heard of Lucy, the Australopithecus female, arguably one of the most famous discoveries of the 20th century. She was discovered in Ethiopia in 1974. That day, the Beatles' song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was playing on repeat at the anthropologist's camp, and so the specimen's nickname was born. Australopithecines are unusual apes. Scientists realized that they must have had some relation to our ancestors. But through much of the 20th century, only their skulls and teeth were found. Lucy was the first fairly complete skeleton to be discovered. When finally all 3'6" of her appeared, it was a turning point in anthropology. Darwin had predicted that if we dug in Africa, we'd find a bipedal ape. Lucy turned out to be just that. She had the brain volume of a chimpanzee, but her knee joints clearly showed that she walked confidently on 2 legs. Lucy was believed to be the most likely candidate for modern humans' ancestor, the missing link. But then came Kenyanthropus platyops, or flat-faced Kenyan man, at Lake Turkana. Leakey's team discovered it in 1999. It appeared to be an even more direct ancestor. This ape lived on the shores of Lake Turkana several 100,000 years before Lucy lived in Ethiopia. It had a flattened and therefore more human-like face. Suddenly, Lucy looked like a more distant relative of ours. She was displaced to the side off the main highway connecting apes and humans. And so, Kenyanthropus disrupted that old notion of our simple step-by-step evolution.
Thought that there was a sort of linear progression in evolution, which was sort of the conventional thinking. We now know that not to be true, largely because over the past 100 years, many more sites have been discovered and many more fossils have been found of human ancestors from different parts of Africa and also from more recent sites outside of Africa. So we got a much more complete picture and understanding of what that overall concept might be. We now know that it wasn't just one thing evolving into a trunk of a tree, if you want to use that analogy, but it's much more like a diverse bush. You've got lots of different lineages, many of which become extinct.
We, Homo sapiens, were just one branch from that bush.
So if you go back 50,000 years, there were several species of upright walking apes that coexisted on planet Earth. Today we find ourselves alone as a single species. That is not the norm. In the past, it's always been that there have been multiple species that existed on the planet of upright walking apes.
And that whole family tree kept branching and branching out. There were many strange apes and humans coexisting. There was, for instance, one weird ape that scientists refer to as a bipedal cow. It walked upright, but its immense jaws allowed it to eat dry grass in massive amounts. This is probably why it survived until quite recently, because it avoided competing for food with other, more human-like apes. Kenyanthropus lived in East Africa, probably competing with other hominids for food or territory and maybe even killing each other like chimpanzee groups do today. And then, 1 million years later, Kenyanthropus descendants made a technological breakthrough. They transitioned from using simple sticks and stones to making sharpened rocks called choppers, becoming Homo habilis. But this simple picture was also redrawn because of an astonishing find at Lake Turkana. From the storage room, Louise brings a box containing round stones, each about the size of a child's head. The stones have strange chips. 10 years ago, at the site where Kenyanthropus was found, paleontologists were searching for ape bones in a 3.5 million year old layer of sediment. They were sifting the sediment through heavy sieves propped up on stones. And then, a French archaeologist named Sonia Armand walked by.
And Sonia said, those are work tools, and they are everywhere. And they're like tumbling out of the hillsides. And so everyone said, you can't get tools at that age. And so she's had a real fight trying to actually prove that these are tools and they are in the excavation. To find tools at 3.5 million years is as astounding in some ways as finding that, that there's more diversity. Of course, it's somewhat, if you've got something and you need
something sharp, you're going to make it, right? If you can't find a sharp object, it's the obvious thing to do. And now we know there's tool use in all sorts of other animals as well. So it's no surprise that these bigger-brained ancestors were making tools. But 3.5 million years to find the evidence is actually really quite spectacular.
These apes had industry, and this shattered existing assumptions. Once again, 21st century paleontology was breaking its old boundaries. Remember I said earlier in this episode that humans were thought to be the only animal on Earth that ever made tools using other tools. Well, it turns out another ape did that too. It was Kenyanthropus, the recently discovered hominid, the one that displaced the famous Lucy as a pivotal link, and it was doing it too. I asked Louise if she regrets not being the one to find these tools.
Tools don't speak to me like fossils. I prefer working on fossils. As I said, I walk along the site. Unless you're looking for tools, I don't see them. Because I've got a search image for bone. And if you start looking for tools, you'll spot them. If you start looking for snails, you'll see snails everywhere.
I watch as fossil hunters dig up an ancient hippopotamus with hammers. I pick up a bone that's just lying on the surface of the excavation site. It feels about 8 times heavier than I expect. That's because it's not a bone. It's a stone, which was a bone 2 million years ago. What's this?
It's not a very nice piece.
Louise immediately identifies the item I've picked up as worthless. She says the fragment is too incomplete and there are hundreds of thousands like it there. And that is a special skill, quickly distinguishing the rare from the ubiquitous. For instance, the archaeologist Sonia Arman immediately saw tools where paleoanthropologists saw simple stones. It's just like how an experienced mushroom picker walks through the forest as if guided by an internal fungi filter. The Leakey family invited and trained many fossil hunters to work with them, some of whom later became scientists in their own right. Their field-searching skills are so highly honed, they're almost instinctive. But soon, hunting for ancient fossils will be complemented by cutting-edge technologies. I was visiting Lake Turkana with Artem Yukhin. He had actually invited me on the trip. In the interest of transparency, I should say, I paid for my trip to Nairobi myself and have no financial ties with Artem.
My name is Art Yukhin, so I am founder and president of Artec 3D. This is the company that provides technologies to make, as we say now, digital clones, 3D scanning of different objects, environments.
Artec 3D makes three-dimensional scanners that digitally capture all sorts of objects and spaces.
From very small things, like microns, to very big ones, like vehicles or bridges or big excavation sites or crime scenes or something like this.
Artec is now working with Louise and her institute.
First of all, I need to say that I think we changed the story of archaeology and paleontology. I modestly can say that our technology made a big change.
Artec's handheld scanners can clone whole excavation sites.
It can be many hundred square meters excavation, and you can document everything from this excavation to very small things with color and with geometry. So it started to be used from the beginning by archaeologists and paleontologists, and we have all prominent groups from Latin America to Africa, everywhere using our technology. Because before that, 90% of information disappeared after the discovery was made.
Archaeologists always record everything at the dig site. It's all photographed, annotated, and marked. But 3D models can make record-keeping more reliable. The scanners that Artyom describes are about the size and weight of a motorcycle helmet. They cost as much as a car, though, and they're clunky. Holding one in your hands feels like you've traveled back to the 60s and are holding an early video camera. But it's clear that these devices will soon become cheaper and simpler to use. In Japan, for example, every prefecture has purchased these scanners for police to use at crime scenes. The cigarette butt left on a scene will remain in the exact spot it was found, frozen in time. Even decades after this, you can return with new evidence and see the crime scene exactly as it was. Paleontologists have similar challenges. Once they've removed a layer of sediment, they can't go back. But if you regularly scan the excavation site, you can fix mistakes. Maybe a stone you discarded was actually a bone, and maybe you suspect that bone was attached to a skeleton. Checking the scan might mean finding the rest of the specimen. These scanners would seem especially useful here at Lake Turkana. 15,000 square kilometers of desert where bones just lie on the surface is impossible to process no matter how many hunters you send into the field. The landscape changes every 15 years or so. Some things disappear while erosion exposes new layers. Recently, Louise and her colleagues conducted an experiment. They photographed large areas of land with a drone and then uploaded these photos to a website. There, thousands of volunteers worldwide reviewed the photos and cataloged what they saw. They were essentially remote fossil hunters. Can machine learning do this job? And what if we go further by deploying fossil hunting robots?
I would really like to get something like that Boston Dynamics type of dog who can, write it itself and put a camera or a video camera, and it can remotely scan that surface, and then you can live serve that up, and you could have it in the same place with the team. But you have to have a team of people who can deal with that tech, because the tech generates so much extra work and noise. For me, it's more productive to have my guys just go out and spend 2 weeks in that small area, and I know pretty much that they're going to have found most things. But the value, educationally and scientifically, for engaging people and getting them to think about our past, you can't compare. And that's why I think there's an added value in having that.
Louise and the Leakey family haven't just made contributions to science. Their work has provided jobs and education to aspiring archaeologists. No one is suggesting replacing people with robots, but scanning the entire area and putting the results into a database could give people more work rather than less. Machines will recognize areas where fossil hunters should search for new Turkana boys. In that sense, new technologies would augment the work that 3 generations of the Leakey family dedicated their lives to, helping us discover who we are and where we came from. So that was the Turkana episode. And now, I'm holding a new book called A Brief History of the Female Body by Dina Emera. On page 74, I see images of 4 female bodies in particular. One is the elephant shrew. It's a tiny relative of the elephant from sub-Saharan Africa. Next is a bat, and then a rodent from Egypt called the spiny mouse. The fourth is a primate, in this case a chimpanzee. So, what do all these creatures have in common? No, this isn't a poster for the next Zootopia cartoon. All 4 of these groups are rare exceptions to the mammalian world. They, and only they, menstruate. So, what is menstruation for? And if it's so important, why do only a few mammals do it? You might think this basic and painful part of life has been exhaustively studied. It has not. But that's coming up in 2 weeks. To make sure you don't miss it, subscribe, follow, and listen to The Naked Morat wherever you get your podcasts. Plus, If you enjoyed it, share the podcast with your colleagues, friends, and anyone else who might be interested. This will help us reach new listeners who will discover the fascinating world of science. And also, if you're in the mood, drop us a line. There is a mailbox, nakedmallrat@libo.me. It's in the description of this episode. So, this was The Naked Mole Rat, a podcast from Libo Studio. It is produced by Andrey Borzenko, Ilya Marritz, Danil Astapov, Anastasia Medvedeva, and Lika Kremer. Our sound editors are Ildar Fattakhov and Alexei Vorobyov, and I'm Ilya Kolmanovsky. See you in 2 weeks.